Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of You Gotta Act, a podcast about actors and acting. Today, my guest is a friend of mine. It's a great film lover, probably the person I know who owns the most Blu-rays and DVDs of anyone.
It's my biggest claim to fame.
And this guest is Paul Reed.
Hello.
Hi, Paul.
Delighted to be on with you.
Thank you. I'm so glad. Like I was saying, you have a lot of Blu-rays, and it's something I admire a lot, even as sometimes I don't understand it. But
Got to get that physical media, man. You got to protect it. Yeah,
it's true. So before we get started, I'll tell people what actor you chose because I think it's gonna make everyone really excited. You chose to talk about the one and only Tom Cruise today.
Yes, indeed.
Which I'm super excited to talk about with you. I think I had an amazing time with Alessandro rewatching or watching for the first time some of his countless classics. And yeah, I think we could talk about him for like 4 or 5 episodes, but we're going to keep it to one. Yeah. So before we get to him, can you introduce yourself a bit?
Sure thing. I'm Paul Reed. I am acquisitions manager for a company called Picturehouse Entertainment. In my professional life, I am in the business of looking for films for distribution, a wide church of films for UK distribution, everything from kind of English language indies with strong cast and directors to foreign language and festival breakouts, that kind of stuff. But yeah, my first love is, of course, Tom Cruise. And yeah, I mean, if I was to sort of think about what he means to me as a star and what he's meant to me as like a sort of big symbol of cinema since my early years, it's of someone who is a quintessential movie star, someone who, you know, I don't know, I can't remember the attribution of it, but the idea of a star who is only ever truly really himself in a film. You know, he can go through various character archetypes, he can give various different performances in lots of different genres and styles and modes, but ultimately there's something about him that remains the same across a body of work, which isn't to say that he's monotonous, but to say that there is something so fascinating about his persona as it has evolved across the years that keeps bringing you back, and obviously keeps bringing massive audiences back to his movies in whatever mode they're in. Everything from kind of high concept sci-fi and action franchise films to kind of like the more independent, more kind of drama driven stuff he did, particularly in the middle of his career, working with directors like Paul Thomas Anderson, Cameron Crowe and the like. But yeah, no, I mean, the first Tom Cruise film I saw was Mission Impossible in 1996. Right. He was just an idol from that point onwards, you know, just everything from, you know, Mission Impossible 2 was a huge movie for me in 2000. It was like one of the first 15s I was able to see at the cinema. It was, you know, something where the combination of things that I love, Tom Cruise, John Woo, action cinema, things blowing up, slow-mo, all those things combined to this
what
perfect
more do you
storm.
need?
Yeah, everything. And at the same time, he was doing all this kind of more, I don't know, out there stuff, working with, you know, PTA, doing Magnolia and making films like Villa in the Sky and Eyes Wide Shut. So you've got that perfect moment where all the action spectacle stuff is great because you're just getting into that. And also you may be sort of discovering, you know, a different type of cinema, a different type of storytelling through those kind of weirder movies he was doing at the time, or less mainstream films, not weird. But
I remember, like, I think as much as you say Mission Impossible 2 is a big film for you, I think you're right. Like, Vanilla Sky is a massive film for you because I can't think of like how many times it comes up in conversation and you're just always like, just Vanilla Sky, Vanilla Sky, Vanilla Sky. And I agree, like it is an amazing film. Yeah. I didn't see it straight away, but I think I first saw the original, I think it's a Spanish film. Called, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's called Open Your Eyes in Spanish.
Los ojos, but I hope that's how you pronounce it because there's probably Spanish listeners who hate me now. But
yeah. And I saw that at university, and when you told me that there was a remake with Tom Cruise, I was like, this is so stupid. I don't understand it. But it is a quintessential Tom Cruise film in that way as well. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. But so you didn't know him before Mission Impossible, right? That was your first introduction.
Not really. Yeah. I mean, I think I remember watching Mission Impossible 1, the Brian De Palma film, at a friend's house on VHS. and not having seen Top Gun, not having seen, you know, Risky Business, not having seen The Firm or Interview with a Vampire, any of that early stuff, and just thinking, you know, wow, here is someone. And bear in mind also, before that point, I was also kind of broadly aware, because I watched it when I was very little, of the TV show Mission Impossible, which is a sort of wonderful relic of the 1960s, if your listeners haven't sort of seen it before, and very different from the franchise that Tom Cruise has created. But yeah, no, I sort of came to it, you know, very, very shocked that characters that you know from the original show are very different in the new movies. And
well, first of all, they all die.
Yeah, I mean, but like, you can't get past the fact that the whole, spoilers, the first movie culminates with the main hero of the original show turning out to be the worst villain imaginable, and like, obviously, you know, he sort of quickly disappears from the franchise for various reasons. But yeah, no, it was a shocking sort of like spin on the original show, whilst also, you know, an amazing showcase for Tom Cruise, the physical actor, in terms of like just all the running around he does, the stunts. You know, no one could forget the scene of him descending on the live wire down into, well, on the wire down into the sort of scientific, into the secure FBI,
the computer room or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's just that's fucking iconic. But he creates iconic moments in every film, no matter. You know, that just seems to be part of his business. Like, it's about creating these moments that are just so pure and so kind of emphatic and kind of maximalist in some sort of way.
I think that's why, like, for me, Mission Impossible 1, the first one, is still like one of the key texts, because it is the meeting of Tom Cruise, who loves to make kind of set pieces, and Brian De Palma, who's 100% about set pieces, and them working together to make this just constantly iconic film. Like, every single moment, that every time I watch the scene in the computer room, it's like I remember every single shot. Like, I remember every single, when the little rat comes, like, I was like, I remember this, you know. But at the same time, like you were saying, I honestly had no idea that there was a TV show of Mission Impossible. I mean, I could have guessed, but I listened to an interview with Brian De Palma recently, and he explained that, you know, when they offered him to do that with Tom Cruise, he was like, yeah, of course, that's amazing. And they had to kind of change the screenwriter a few times because Tom Cruise wasn't happy. And the reason why every single character dies in the first like 10 minutes, everyone on his team, is because it's a Tom Cruise film. Like, he's the star of the film, you know?
Yeah.
And like, at the same time, it's like an insane flex, but also it makes the film amazing. Like, it makes the film about a guy against his own people because they think he killed them, whatever. And I think, to go deeper into what makes Tom Cruise special, I think the way he's managed his career has been so smart and so calculated, not in a bad way, because I think, you know, it's a business, but I think for a large part of his early career, he was working, when he was really young, like around 20, he was working to establish himself as like a fighter. Like, he always plays like super ambitious people, you know, like super strong, exceptional American types, you know, like in The Color of Money. Even though in The Color of Money, the Scorsese film, he's kind of aloof, but he's still like the best guy at playing pool for whatever reason. It's like so easy for him, no reason. And I think like throughout his career, then he would keep playing the winner, but he would undermine himself occasionally, and never completely, or very rarely completely, because the point was to constantly reestablish that idea of him as like this mythical, all-powerful person. So like for instance, Born on the 4th of July, the Oliver Stone film, where he plays a real person, which is quite unusual for Tom Cruise, I think.
Yeah.
He plays a real guy, but he picked the perfect story, because it's a guy who goes to Vietnam thinking that this is the best thing to do for his country and for his own self-esteem, comes back paralyzed from the waist down, and progressively realizes that the war was a lie. His whole system of belief was wrong, and that, you know, turns out there was no one to fight there. Turns out fighting for your country when your country doesn't care about you is not a thing. But still, when he becomes a loser, he's like the best loser. Like, he's the greatest loser, because then he becomes an activist. Then he turns his rage into like something productive. And it's like, it feels like Tom Cruise just cannot lose. You know, he's always gonna rise on top.
Yeah, I mean, if you separate that movie out from its original source material and the original sort of historical context in which it was made, I mean, obviously it sort of comes on a high of films sort of interrogating the previous sort of 20, 25 years of American history through a new lens, you know, post Apocalypse Now, post Deer Hunter, post Stone's previous film Platoon, all kind of problematizing the idea of kind of American exceptionalism and, you know, American intervention in Vietnam. But if you take away all of that and reduce it down to its essence, as a Tom Cruise vehicle, you're right. The whole film exists as a way for him to start off with all the tools that he has in his early career. So,
Yeah.
you know, all of the kind of sass and Americana and kind of masculine energy that he has in things like Risky Business and All the Right Moves and stuff like that. Take that away quite suddenly through the experience that he has in Vietnam, and then emerge into something completely new and more heroic, ironically more heroic, more complex and more kind of slightly more introspective, but still the movie fucking ends with him, you know, addressing a crowd who all adore him and all love him. So it's a great transition text for him, just separate from the Ron Kovic story. It's like, this is the new direction that we're going in towards the mid period of Cruise's films. Yeah, it's a fascinating film. I think it's so interesting, Manuela. It's like this thing where like so many of his films, because he is such a controlling influence on all of his films and produces so many of them and works with, you know, directors often only once or twice once he's kind of got to know them and works with them closely. There is a sense that you can sort of look at each film as very much a kind of meta text about Cruise and his stardom, because he has he exerts such a control over his film, so you can't help but do that when you watch those films. Yeah, for sure.
He's the author of his films.
Yeah.
And I could talk about Born on the 4th of July all day long, because it is truly fascinating for that reason. And the fact that he plays a real person, but absolutely cannot transcend the fact that he's Tom Cruise.
Yes.
Like, to me is fascinating. And like, I don't know how Ron Kovic feels about it, but I mean, he probably feels pretty good about it, but like, it's a perfect tactic, I think, for him.
That wig, man. I mean, like,
it's awful. I cannot believe that Tom Cruise allowed that to be his wig, you know. But anyway, apart from that,
I find it sort of interesting, just separate from the whole Cruise thing, though. It's also like with Stone, obviously he was on this run of making those sort of introspective political films about recent American history, but also he, with that film, kind of created an archetype for a certain type of very bombastic biopic, such that when you actually watch it, and you watch also films of the time that he did, like The Doors, you're almost kind of taken aback by how cliched it seems and how unsubtle it appears. But that's just really because he's creating that mode, which then becomes such a big type of American movie, particularly you know, the early noughties with loads of music biopics, Walk the Line, Ray, all that kind of stuff. All of them owe a huge debt to that overall kind of structure that he kind of created in a way. So
totally. And I feel like that film is also Tom Cruise transitioning to a different kind of film where he plays kind of like the total exaggeration of this guy, which is like, you know, pure immortal action, or not action, sometimes fantastical, like in Interview with the Vampire. He's like just he's really establishing his myth himself by playing guys who literally do not die. Or, you know, like Mission Impossible. And I don't know, I think it works because he has a certain acting style that is very consistent, which is defined by being super focused. And like, when he's doing something, he's doing it, you can sense that he's fully focused on what he's doing. And I think that works, but I think it also makes him a bit annoying because it feels like he doesn't have any moment of weakness.
Well, that's also just kind of the poise that he has as a very obviously very physically fit person, and someone who started their life as an athlete. There's obviously that kind of determination, that single-mindedness that seems to be applied to his acting style, definitely. But it's interesting that you talk about how annoying that can be. I find him more caustic and more difficult a screen presence, or more of a kind of frustrating screen presence in those early films where he's a bit more shrill. His voice is up is up higher younger, just by virtue of being a younger man. And also the kind of characters that he plays, you know, those very cocksure, very cocky, very sort of always getting the girl, always saying and doing exactly the right cool thing, sort of prancing about, always being, you know, the best. Like, think about that dance stuff that he does in The Firm that's completely extraneous to the film. Just him dancing down the street doing cartwheels or whatever. I'm like, slow down, you know, man. It's like, you don't need to be so energetic. It's like mania. Yeah. But then later, I think as he gets older, it sort of settles down into something that's a bit more, maybe colder, but certainly very charismatic, but in a sort of still way. It's odd that so many videos exist of Cruise running and all the sort of supercuts of him running, and that's a big part of his sort of persona, partly because of the films he does, where there's so much peril and he's being chased around by villains all the time. But I don't really associate him so much in his acting style with movement. I think of him as quite a still actor, certainly facially and certainly in terms of his delivery, such that when he does burst into anger or shout or get upset or whatever, it's always quite sort of shocking in a way. You know, like I think Magnolia is quite a shocking film in terms of like the way you see him emote there.
And the biggest scene for him in Magnolia is the scene when he's trying not to cry.
Yeah.
So it's like interesting of like trying to resist action, you know, or movement or whatever. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think, I don't know, like some of his films, when I watch them, I wish there was more of this. There was more of him breaking the stillness, I guess, like breaking down. And I rewatched only his clips from Magnolia because I didn't have time to watch the 3.5 hour long film, and I've seen it before. And it's like, it's probably some of his best work because it is both things. It is both the unhinged, super dedicated guru style Cruise, and it's also him breaking down because the character he plays learns that his father is dying. And I think, and also it's PTA doing those long takes, so it allows Cruise to just do his thing with no fat. It's just him on a black stage. It's perfect. It's like Cruise on the plate, you know, on a silver plate. And I watching that, I see so much more happening on his face. Like I see so much more aliveness. There's this one moment when he's doing a speech to the guys in the audience about, you know, you have to respect the cock or whatever, and how to fake being nice and caring.
Yes.
You know, and at some point, like he's on a roll, and then he says, "Get your blue books page 23."
Yes.
And then he smashes it, and he's like, he throws a table, and he says, "No, get your white books."
Yes.
And it's like there's no breaks. It's just he's freaking out from one moment. That is terrifying and much more human than some of the other stuff he does.
Yeah, there's an amazing moment I remember also in that film where he's being interviewed by a woman who's basically, her purpose is to come and interview him and expose a big secret from his past. For those people who haven't seen it, no spoilers, but in the run up to this moment where she reveals information that causes him to completely kind of break down, although kind of maintain an aura of control, even as he's sort of clearly kind of falling apart. There's a moment where she notices that he's missed a button on his shirt, and she says to him something like, you know, you've missed a button. And this after he's basically made this whole parade to her of how masculine and how sexually, you know, successful he is, and even sort of flirting with her and all that stuff. And there's like a little boy lost quality to that moment, and the actress, I wish I remembered her name, is so good at articulating something which I think we as an audience often get from his performances, where there's this grand show of rambunctious, almost dangerous energy, but there's also a little boy in him that is desperate to please all the time, and that hasn't really gone away, even though he's got older. He's, you know, pushing 60 now. There's still a quality to him that is quite, I think, whether deliberately or just a subtle part of his stardom, that has that kind of little boy quality that has to do with always wanting to impress, always wanting to be the best, always wanting to prove himself. And I think, yeah, you're right, Magnolia is such an amazing showcase for that quality in him. And PTA, obviously, with those long takes, establishes the cracks in that persona, because even when he's doing the whole presentation and the respect the cock stuff, it's still like, Christ, man, this is somebody who is just not very much on the brink. You know, like, no, it's an incredible performance in an absolutely incredible film. So
that film is a lot, but and it's incredible that he accepted to do that. I think, you know, he has done some, because in preparation for this episode, so Paul loves Google Docs and Google Excel. In your work, you use it a lot, so you become really good at it. And in preparation for this, you sent me a Google Excel of like all his films
Yeah.
and like little notes about each of them. And I love that. I mean, not saying that every guest of the podcast needs to do that, but I really
Just
appreciated
up
it.
their game, man. Yeah.
And I think for Cruise, it's actually super helpful.
Mhm.
And for some of those films, including Magnolia, I think you wrote in the column type, you wrote meta-textual Cruise because it's like self-referential. And I think it's interesting because it's kind of what I was saying earlier about how, he's established himself as a strong guy, then he undermines that. In that way, that alone is metatextual. But I think when you wrote this for like Magnolia, it's more because it's fully about our perception of Tom Cruise. So a more recent example is Edge of Tomorrow, the Doug Liman movie, where he literally plays himself becoming Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And it's a delight. I mean, for me, this is one of the most successful recent Cruise films. And I rewatched it last night, and it's perfect because he gets to be vulnerable. He gets to be a loser, if you want. But then it's hilarious how, because the concept of the film is that he's the media relations guy for the US Army. And he arrives in Europe because there's this alien invasion. And suddenly, Brendan Gleeson tells him, you have to go and fight on the front. And this makes me think a lot of Born on the 4th of July. So it's kind of a reversal because this time he absolutely does not want to go to fight because he's not this guy. He's not trained. He's no one. He just ended up working for the media relations for the US Army. He ends up there and then he fights aliens best he can. He dies and he finds out that he's reliving the same day. And through that motif, he trains and he becomes amazing at training. And also he develops his memory because the same day happens exactly the same way. So anyway, it's a perfect vehicle for him because he gets to show us how he became himself. And it could feel super annoying or like just self-serving, and it is self-serving for him, but it is, to me, it's hilarious because it's also a very funny film, even if it's brutal. And I just think it's perfect.
Yeah. No, I mean, the idea of an opportunity for us who may be annoyed by his sort of kind of inexorable charm, like people who might be annoyed by his presence as this kind of Superman, action man, stoic guy who always gets to shoot the right person at the right time, all that stuff. The idea that you can exercise those hatreds in the form of seeing him just die over and over again is kind of cool, and like that plays with that idea. But also that the process of kind of becoming that bigger over time in this film that's also just about a kind of gaming aesthetic as well, the idea of like endlessly doing the same bit of a video game until you get it exactly right, but integrating that into cinema, which is already in this kind of strange give and take relationship with gaming as well. It's a fantastic film. You're right, it's another film that sort of plays with his persona. I think I would situate Edge of Tomorrow amongst a group of films over the last decade or so which have been exclusively action-driven spectacle films where he's basically the sort of vessel, both financially, because he's almost kind of guarantees box office, and just in terms of like him fully leading a film and almost his body being the site of the film. I would say that's a kind of metatextual riff on those films where he is that figure, that born entertainer, that action man body that is endlessly kind of like leading these movies. But then the kind of meta films we talked about, things like Magnolia or to a certain extent Vanilla Sky, are kind of playing with that mid-period Cruise, and also just it's him kind of literally kind of letting his hair down at that point in his career. I think he has very long hair in Magnolia and Vanilla Sky and stuff like. And I'd include a film like Last Samurai in there as well, which is kind of like a wacky movie, but a historical epic that's sort of this kind of Dances with Wolves kind of touristic movie about a white man entering into a sort of particular set of customs and cultures. But there's a lot of kind of introspection there as well, because he plays a very deluded character who gradually, through this interaction with this community, learns to get his mojo back again, which is a big motif at that time.
He has played a lot of guys who are like super like annoying or annoyed or cynical. Like, I mean, Rain Man for me is an example. Another film I particularly enjoy for many reasons.
Yes.
Not just so much him, but more Dustin Hoffman. I just think it's a masturbatory performance. But you know, fascinating in terms of Cruise finding someone who's shorter than him, and and also he plays the brother of the titular Rain Man. I can't remember his name. It's a real person, and he's like super horrible to him, and then progressively he becomes nicer. And I think Cruise has done that a lot, which I think again, like in terms of establishing his persona, is extremely smart, because it's kind of like he's starting the film saying, "Look, you don't have to like me. I don't even like myself. You know, like I'm a piece of shit." And then he proves himself, and I mean you wrong, and that is always, I mean, that's a great formula.
Yeah, well, it's there in Jerry Maguire, you know, a film about a kind of very cynical huckster who's like, you know, not really got anything going on in his life except money and power, but he learns all the good life stuff, you know, all the important things that matter. That's a very big arc for his films. Like, yeah, whether it's through the process of meeting a character like in Rain Man who brings to him, you know, the life that he deserves and all that stuff. Yeah, no, that's a consistent trope. But I'm more interested, like, in terms of like the sort of peak of this. I know it sounds ridiculous because I'm bringing this back to Vanilla Sky again, but I'm just really interested in the way that sort of ends or plateaus with two films, with Eyes Wide Shut and with Vanilla Sky, both of which are kind of the antithesis of that, in that they are both films in which Cruise, well, Eyes Wide Shut is a special case because it's Cruise working with Kubrick and a sort of meta-textual thing where Cruise seems sort of almost at sea in this movie that's also pretty wild and formally crazy and, you know, dense with ideas and themes. And there's almost a kind of unbearably meta quality to seeing him act or try to act in these very complex scenes, which he doesn't even seem to fully understand, which works perfectly for the character because that's what he's going through. He's trying to navigate a world that he is fully not in control of for the first time. But also Vanilla Sky, in the sense that, you know, no spoilers, but Vanilla Sky is essentially a film about someone who slowly realizes that they are completely alone. So it's sort of like the opposite of those other movies or those previous films, which are so concerned with the idea of an evolving personality that comes from a shared experience or from learning from someone or from some experience, the value of something. Those two films are kind of cold. Even Magnolia to a certain degree. I mean, like Magnolia is so shrouded in movie kind of hyper-realism and distance that it's difficult to kind of make the same conclusions about that film. But Magnolia is at heart, you know, on a superficial level, a film about how we're all connected and we all need to kind of take a moment to appreciate, you know, human connection and kindness and being good and all that shit. But like, you know, that's kind of a different kind of set of preoccupations from both of those films, from Eyes Wide Shut and Vanilla Sky, which is very different and singular in his filmography, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably the reason why, for me, Eyes Wide Shut is just endlessly fascinating, because just what was he thinking? Like, he was like, I mean, I'm guessing he was thinking, look, it's Stanley Kubrick. Of course I want to do this.
Yeah.
And I think it was an amazing idea. And to me, it made me like Tom Cruise more because of that, because of the fact that he was willing to put himself in those insanely weird, embarrassing situations. I mean, he is completely, it's a different kind of emasculation from Born on the 4th of July, you know, where, you know, there's a scene actually in Born on the 4th that for me makes the film better than what it is. If that makes sense. It's one scene. It's the scene when the character of Ron Kovic, after he's back from the war and he's lost the use of his legs, he goes to Mexico and he has sex with a prostitute there, with a sex worker. And to me, that's a moment when the film transcends its no, I don't want to say basicness, but like it's insane meaning-making mode, where it's like every single moment has a meaning and it's clear. It's like war is bad, you know. Every single moment of the film is about this. But in that moment, the character knows that he can't really have sex like he used to, and Tom Cruise is very shy and uncomfortable and just scared. And for me, and that scene obviously cuts too quickly. It's too short, because every time, I feel like some of those films, every time they get to something like that, they have to cut. And it's so frustrating. But anyway, there's still a good moment in that film where you just see him having sex with this woman and enjoying it and crying because he's having this experience. He's feeling, you know, this emasculation, but at the same time feeling like maybe he's still someone. And to me, Eyes Wide Shut is like that extended in a way, and more cynical, making fun of him. He doesn't have the same kind of redemption, or like, you know, not redemption, but like chance at being not emasculated again. It's just at the end when his wife says we need to have sex as soon as possible. Does she say fuck? I think she says fuck.
Yeah, the last line is, do you know what we've got to do really soon? And he says, what? And she says fuck, and then it cuts to back. It's brilliant.
Right. So
that's great.
So for me, Eyes Wide Shut is like that moment from Born on the 4th of July kind of extended and really explode. And I kind of understand that he didn't do that too much, because it must be, for, you know, for any actor, it would be challenging. And it didn't really fit with his plan of becoming this superior being, I guess.
I think that but I mean, you know, I agree that scene in Born on the 4th of July is excellent and so tender and so kind of like real in a film that also is so hyper real in so many ways and so hyper stylized with all the performances and all the things it's doing. But yeah, it also kind of problematizes, or at least changes, a kind of sexuality which Cruise, I think, embodies in those early films, and to a certain degree in all his films, which is very phallic, very male, and very driven by male pleasure. Whereas that scene is exclusively, or at least, you know, in the mechanics of it, is about female pleasure, and shared experiences and a shared kind of union, which is unusual at that time for him. When you think of, you know, when you think of the character in Risky Business, or you think of the character in Top Gun, it's all about, yeah, you know, like I'm the coolest guy in the room, and like all these women want to fuck me, and it's like the proof of the masculinity, rather than like, you know, anything that's kind of reciprocal or shared. So that's what makes it kind of tender and unusual in his films. And then, yeah, when you get to something like Eyes Wide Shut, which is all about, you know, to me, it's a really elaborate joke, because the whole film is so about interiority and fantasy and, you know, loneliness and sort of feelings of inadequacy and feelings of fear, which all kind of express themselves in this really fucking elaborate mise-en-scène that's, you know, all kinds of sexually perverse setups which Tom Cruise goes through. And then when it ultimately comes down to it, the film is about, you know, the need for these two people just to fuck, and that's what's going to make things better, or at least temporarily going to make things better. So yeah, no, I mean, yeah, he's such an interesting figure. I mean, like, he's such a sex symbol in many ways, because he embodies a kind of, for me, a kind of 80s, 90s kind of virility, male virility, male movie star virility, or whatever. But he's also, again, I'm coming back again to this like little boy thing, which is just not quite the same kind of energy as other stars. Like, I think of,
action man, like it's like a little boy who wants to do all the stuff, you know.
Yeah, so sex scenes or a sexual encounter with a woman in a movie is on a par with a goal-driven thing that you would get out of, you know, like him having to find the fucking the bomb in a room, or like him having to defuse some situation. It's like the same set of like goal-driven things, which yeah, it's unusual for him not to be like that.
I find it interesting though that you call him a sex symbol, because I was thinking about that earlier, and you know, movie stars, everybody's saying that movie stars are kind of dead, you know. It's not what it used to be, good or bad, I don't know, it's just what it is. Tom Cruise is still there though, and he's definitely a movie star. And if we think of other remaining, if you want, movie stars on that level, I think, for instance, I was thinking about Brad Pitt, you know. And for me, the quality of the stardom is so different. Like, for instance, I think Brad Pitt, one big reason why he's famous is because he's hot and people find him attractive, or sexually attractive, fantasize about him in that sense, you know. And he's also got this like charisma, like he seems cool, you know, just cool all the time. But when I think of Cruise, I really don't think of him in that way at all. Like, for me, he's not cool. A sexual being, and he's not cool. He's not exactly cool. He's cool in the sense that he does crazy stuff and he's impressive, but he's not cool. And I just feel like that's quite a unique way of becoming a star, because not the easy way, but like the common way is the, you know, sexual path, if you want, being Brad Pitt, being beautiful, being hot, and being talented. And I feel like it's interesting that without doing this Cruise managed to be where he is. I mean, he does show his arms, and he's very ripped, and he's very fit, and he runs really fast, but it's not in the same way.
Well, it's so interesting that you were talking a moment ago about what led Cruise to make a film like Eyes Wide Shut. And you got to remember, when Eyes Wide Shut was made, obviously he had his marriage or relationship with Nicole Kidman, and that was a huge kind of tabloid deal and such a huge part of kind of his stardom and her stardom at the time. They'd done 2 movies together, Days of Thunder and Far and Away, but the big sell of Eyes Wide Shut was, we're going to get to see Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise fuck. That was the whole thing. It was like, okay, here's the movie where 2 of the most beautiful people in the world who are together in real life are really going to fuck in a movie by Kubrick, and that was the sell. In the same way with someone like Pitt, when he was in his relationship with Angelina Jolie, a movie like Mr. and Mrs. Smith existed as a vehicle for people to see these 2 beautiful people who are in real life together, have a whole dynamic which is like a rom-com thing, but ultimately it's about 2 beautiful people being together and fucking in a movie. That, yeah, you're right, it's difficult to think of stars or new stars where that's quite the same now. But then also I think, you're right, Pitt is a bit different from Cruise in that Pitt has maintained a kind of sexual allure and like been a big sort of I think, they're both beautiful men, but at the same time, it's a very different kind of stardom. I think Eyes Wide Shut, and to a certain degree, Vanilla Sky, sort of like marks the end of Tom Cruise, the kind of ultra sexy movie star, and the shift into action man, soul, individualistic, manifest destiny, going to go off and lead this movie, this action franchise, this sci-fi, whatever. And, women are in the movies, like love interests are in the movies, but they're kind of second fiddle to this whole stardom, which is very much focused on him. Whereas with Pitt, I think it's a bit different. I think Clooney, it's a bit different. Will Smith, it's a bit different. I don't know who else who are the other stars who still sell films or are still like big stars. Hanks is a bit different because he belongs to a slightly different type of star. But yeah, no, you're right. It's a dying breed. DiCaprio, Pitt, Cruise, Will Smith.
I think DiCaprio maybe is the closest to Cruise in his style, because he's got the same kind of determination, anxiety going on. Yeah. And with the Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he also played that.
Once Upon a Time in America. That'd be strange.
With that Tarantino film, he also explored like a new kind of vulnerability, challenging the image we have of him as this like super focused actor bent on having an Oscar.
Yeah,
so that was interesting.
That's to me what distinguishes Cruise from DiCaprio or Pitt. Really is that both Pitt and DiCaprio, as much as they still lead franchise movies or lead big star vehicles, Pitt will do World War Z, DiCaprio will do, DiCaprio does a slightly different kind of movie, but DiCaprio will do a Revenant or something. They're still actors who will do bit parts in smaller films or in slightly more independently skewed films or slightly different kind of films, whereas Cruise is still very much the producer, filmmaker, actor who will make a big tentpole summer movie and not really do anything else. That's kind of all he does now. It's a while since he did like a little cameo, like it's a while since he did Goldmember or Tropic Thunder or something like that. So he belongs to a certain type of star who does fully control and fully, create their own sort of franchise films in a way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like the fact that he's doing this, that he's approaching film in that way, like, doing only the big ones now, like the big tentpoles. It's not, I don't think it's only because he doesn't really need, I mean, obviously he's rich, like wherever, he doesn't really need to do the big parts anymore. He's done that a lot, like when he started out. But I think it's also because the quality of those films, like the type of film he's making, require like total concentration. And I think it's completely in line with his acting style. His acting style is like extremely focused, It's like this acting exercise I did at school where like you are talking to someone and they are leaving the room and you have to make them not leave just by talking to them. So you have to say stop. You have to say stop so that they stop. Like you have to tell them. And it works, if you're good. And I think Tom Cruise, his entire acting style is like saying the thing so that it's undeniable, And I think his films are like that. Like he's going to make a film in space, apparently. He's going to make a film with NASA. his films are now literally life-threatening to him. Like, he's jumping off planes because he's like, this is all it is. This is what I need to do. It's a life or death situation. You leaving this room now is a life or death situation. And I just can't think of anyone even coming close to this. Like it or don't like it, but it is fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think that he has always wanted to kind of push himself, and that's sort of obviously driven by his sort of drive and his personality. But you know, the situations that he is putting himself in now, doing stunts for Mission Impossible, doing stunts for all the movies that he does now, where it's always about, okay, Tom Cruise climbs the side of a building, or Tom Cruise fucking jumps off the side of a cliff, or falls off a plane or something. Those are all kind of personal bodily risks that are sort of just physical manifestations of things which, you know, maybe 20 years ago he was doing with his own kind of interior world as an actor. You know, like the vulnerability, I mean, keep coming back to this, but the vulnerability and generosity in a way of doing a movie like Magnolia, where he just bears his soul as a major star at that point, who, you know, had a run of huge hits, like every film was a hit every year, making hundreds of millions of dollars for you know, Paramount, Universal, whatever. And then to have that moment of like, I'm going to work with this, you know, respected director who's got a couple of noted films behind him, but still gives me this part. He gives me this part that is completely soul exposing. I think that's a kind of like psychological gymnastics, which are now just all physical for him. So it's such an interesting transition, that early to mid noughties moment where he sort of stops that. I think the last film, where he really just was delivering a performance that wasn't about his physicality and was more about his persona, just exclusively in the room with another actor, is something like Lions for Lambs. You know, and a deeply kind of I don't know, very stagey film in lots of ways, but it's literally him opposite Meryl Streep in his scenes with her, engaged in this really intense duologue about American foreign policy. And he plays this very sort of sleazy, very careerist, very cynical, almost psychotic political figure, who is persuading this journalist played by Meryl Streep to sort of issue a load of propaganda and lies about his plans. And that's a performance that is very much playing with his charm, but also the sense of danger to him. But yeah, I haven't seen a performance like that from him since, really. Which is not to say I don't love the Action Man stuff, but it's been a while. Do you want to just talk about Vanilla Sky really quickly?
Yeah. You want to talk about Vanilla Sky?
No, you talk about it. You talk about Vanilla Sky.
I haven't go in a while, so go for it. Go for it.
For me, the most interesting kind of Cruise performance, and maybe one of my favorite of his films, because to be honest, I've seen this movie many times, and every time I sort of get something new from it. Because when I saw Vanilla Sky in whenever it was 2002 for the first time, I was just so enamored of it because it combined all of my teenage preoccupations. So kind of Hollywood glamour, you know, beautiful aspirational shit, you know, like New York architecture, music, Cameron Crowe's cinema, all these things, with a kind of introspective, kind of paranoid sci-fi element to it. So kind of ultra romantic Hollywood stuff combined with paranoid sort of conspiratorial stuff. And I just think the fact that it's Cruise in the middle of it adds that extra frisson of weirdness, because Cruise is such a strange, unusual figure, as we've discussed. But yeah, no, when I saw it then, it was like, this is fucking awesome. And then, you know, obviously over the last few years, I've sort of seen it a few times as well. And I'm aware of how kind of sophomoric a lot of its kind of psychology is, and a lot of its kind of elements, how kind of hyper stylized and hyper worked over some of it. I mean, there's not a moment where there's not a new music cue or some kind of like magic hour lit sequence, whatever. But at its heart, like, it's quite an interesting film about, you know, desire and aspiration and mental health and romance and sex and all those things. And so I just like endlessly revisit it because I'm so nostalgic about it, but also it's just great. But in terms of where Cruise sits in it, yeah, I mean, the idea of someone who, spoilers for those who haven't seen it, someone who kind of basically enters into a simulation in order to avoid the inevitable aspects of aging and death and disappointment enters into a kind of simulation, which is, you know, parallel to our experience when we go and see films. I think that's kind of endlessly fascinating, and it's a very cool, very weird, out there, very expensive to make, not very successful film financially.
Was it not successful?
No, I don't think it was a huge. I mean, we can have a look. Hold on. I think the budget was like 80 million, and then it didn't really.
That's a lot of money.
Oh, it goes 68 million. It made 203, so that's still
that's
fine.
Pretty good.
But like, it's not like a massive, like when his films typically make like $500 million, $500 million, whatever. It's still like it's surprising. But yeah, no, I just love it, and I think he's so interesting in it because also the whole thing hinges on his extreme beauty and perfection, and the interruption of that by an accident that physically deforms him, and how you cope in the world when you're not Tom Cruise, and like how you continue to what is essence and all that shit. So yeah, no, it's great, really good, and he's so good in it. You see all the modes. You see like the kind of like cheesy grin as wide as you want, and you know, kind of like playboy aspect of his persona, and then you see the little boy thing that we talked about where he's like lost and doesn't know what to do, and then the sort of bombastic action man running around trying to solve what's going on with him, and this kind of like dreamy stonery denouement, which sort of like is very strange when he's right in the middle of this bonkers scenario. But yeah, no, it's great. Watch Vanilla Sky, really interesting movie.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of You Gotta Act. If you wish to know in advance who our next guest will be and ask them a question, become a friend of You Gotta Act on Patreon. See you next time.